After meeting with Uther Pendragon, Merlin of Avalon had gone back to meet with the miners who had come with him. And, quietly, those miners had departed to head along the road to the coast. They had followed the paths that they had found there, making their way over the rocks of the cliffs and down towards the narrow shore, sure-footed with strong fingers, for they had been used to climbing rocks in the mountains of Avalon. And as they neared towards the base, they found what they were looking for. Small, hollowed-out caves in the face of the rock. They edged their way along those cliffs, trying to get as close to Tintagel and the causeway as they could. And for those who were on watch upon the walls of Tintagel, they did not notice Merlin and the party approaching, for their eyes were fixed upon the causeway, for the causeway was the only way to assail the castle. Merlin and the miners slunk into the nearest cave they could find to the causeway's rock. They knew they didn't have to tunnel all the way into the castle. Not from the Cornish cliffside face and around into the causeway and then up into the castle. It would take too long, even by Uther's standards. You'd have been looking at least a month's work. Uther would have fallen by then. No, their plan was much simpler. A castle such as Tintagel, one that was built upon such a rocky outcrop, one which only had one way in and one way out, must have had a second way out. There must have been a secret escape route, tunnels carved within the rocks. What Merlin and his forces had to do was to find a way to tunnel within the rock, to find the adjoining tunnel that was the escape route in and out of Tintagel, and then to follow that all the way inside its walls. Now, Merlin would have been the first to admit that trying to find a single tunnel in a vast cliff face and join forces with it would be almost impossible. But there was only the narrow causeway that connected Tintagel to that Cornish cliffside. The tunnel had to be within a very, very small area, and so he and his miners set to work, knocking pickaxes into stone and rock, and then placing small bags of powder, red and black and yellow, attaching long fuses to it, lighting the fuses, and then setting fire to them and waiting while flame ran along the fuse and into those cavern sides, and then explosion! The sound of thunder, the earth shaking as rocks were thrown out and fell down. Uther heard the thunder and the ground shaking, and in his church he smiled and readied his hand upon his sword. In Tintagel, if Galorian had heard that sound at all, then he did not show it. For indeed, if anyone in Tintagel had heard such a sound of thunder, they would have thought it was the waves, and if they'd felt the ground shaking beneath their feet, they would have assumed it was their own shakes from being so close to starvation. As the day went on, thunder after thunder after thunder rolled within the caves as Merlin and his miners cleaned the way out, removed rock and debris, put in place supports and joists, and lay explosion after explosion after explosion after explosion until, as they cleared away the rubble, they found not another face of rock in front of them, but another tunnel hewn long, long ago, dark and rough cut, and leading along that causeway to Tintagel's keep. Merlin placed his fingers by his lips, and the men doused their candles, drew their swords, which had been painted black to hide in the dark, and then, fingers in front, feeling their way along the rock tunnel walls, they slowly began their approach in to Tintagel. It truly was no secret as to why Uther Pendragon had chosen to begin his war against Cornwall. The people of Tintagel were very clear on just why he had come. He wanted to claim the son of Uther and Igraine, their only son. And throughout the castle, that child was now being treated with suspicion and silence and ill-concealed hatred. The fact that the people of that castle had their lives at stake would no doubt die, that so many of them had already died because of a boy who would not be returned to his father. In the first days of the siege, the guards had been willing to play with the boy. They'd shown him how to fight with a sword, as they always had done. He'd played at knights and adventures in the courtyard, and they'd laughed to see him do so, expecting at any moment in time news that the other Low Kings had come out in support of Gawain to break the siege. But that had not come. And so, in the weeks that had followed, they'd ceased to play with the boy. Instead, they'd gotten serious with him, showing him how to handle a sword properly, showing him how to slay and smite another man so that he might be able to defend himself when the time came. Time had gone by, though. The guards had weakened. Food had become scarcer and scarcer. They did not have the strength now to waste in showing a boy who would no doubt die anyway how to fight. Now they just sat there, and when he asked to go and join in fights with them, the guards told him to piss off. And so the son of Gawain and Igraine wandered the castle. People turned their faces away from him, and he wandered, lost, unsure of just what would happen to him now and what his fate would be. He'd asked his own father, or the man he'd called father, asked Gawain what would become of him now, if he would be going to join with Uther Pendragon, if he would be High King of England. Gawain had not answered. He'd asked his mother if it was true that she had an affair with the king and that Gawain wasn't really his father after all, and if he was King of Cornwall or King of all of England. And his mother had not answered. Now he just wandered, alone and lost, wandered down towards the cellars of the castle, where there was no one to look at him with looks of hate. After all, there was no reason to be in the cellars. There was no food there anymore. So he sat and with a short sword in his hand, practiced out moves, and pretended to fight with the shadows that flickered by candlelight on the walls. And he heard the sound of footsteps, soft footsteps, not like the footsteps he was used to hearing from the guards, ladies and gents. The footsteps of the guards were heavy, for they walked in armour, and the armour clanked. Neither were these the footsteps of the people of the castle of Tintagel. Those ones were soft. Those ones slipped and slid over the stone floors because they did not have the strength to lift their feet up properly anymore. This was the sound of strong footsteps approaching. Footsteps that did not want to be too loud, but wanted to approach at a decent rate anyway. And the boy looked around, sword armed in his hand, wondering, was this it? Had somehow the forces of Uther broken into the castle? And wondering to himself, should he turn? Should he fight against them? Fight for the honour of Cornwall? Or should he give himself up? Announce himself as heir to the High King of Britain and the Lord and Master of Uther's forces? Which one should he do? He turned around, searching for the sound of the forces, and then a heavy sound of stone being forced out. He turned to see one giant flagstone being pushed out from the middle of the floor. The boy readied the sword in front of him, pointed it at the flagstone and the darkness beneath it, as men came out, men armed with swords came out into the candlelight, their forces armed and ready. The boy raised up his sword and cried out, it's me, I'm Thomas, I'm the son of Uther Pendragon, please don't hurt me, please. And his sword clattered to the floor, as one man stepped out from the group and approached the boy and pulled his hair back and his face into the light. The man looked at the boy and said, "Straw hair. Your mother, Igraine. Tell me, what colour is her hair?" "Black. Black," said the boy. "It's black hair." "Yes," said Merlin. "Her hair is black. Her whole line is black of hair, as is that of the Pendragons. Your hair, boy, is straw, not the colour of the king's hair." It's because the man let go and turned to his group. "This is not the heir of the king. Spread out quickly now through the castle. Find him." And the men departed quickly, swords raised, up through the stairways of the castle and through its walls. The man who had held on to the boy's hair stayed in the cellar, though, stayed with eyes fixed upon the boy, as the sound of cries began in the castle, and the sound of steel upon steel clashing, smiting, and then silenced, as weak guards became quickly overcome. The man was Merlin. "Tell me, boy," he said, "were you telling me the truth just now when you said you were the son of Igraine?" "Yes," said the boy. It's me, Thomas. I'm a son of Igraine and an heir to all of England." No, said Merlin. "No, I don't believe you are. I don't know your mother by sight, but I know your father well enough to know, or should I say, I know the man that you allege to be your father well enough, and none of his features are present in your face. Was there any other son born to Igraine?" "No, just me, just..." said Merlin. From upstairs, the sound of fighting had begun to die down. Merlin put his sword away and stepped up to walk along the stairs and then through the corridors and into the keep. The doors were open. Dead guards lay outside it upon the ground. The sounds of fighting now were distant and few and ended quickly. Merlin walked up the stairs, up towards the sound of hammering coming from the chambers of the Lady Igraine. Outside, he found his men standing guard. "Is the lady within?" Merlin said. "She is." "And you've checked in there?" "We have." "There is no boy?" "No, there wouldn't be," said Merlin, and he pushed open the door and stepped through. "My Lady Igraine," he said. Igraine did not look up. She kept hammering. "My Lady Igraine," said Merlin, "where is the child?" She turned and looked at Merlin, her eyes wide. "Here, in the castle." "No," said Merlin. "Your actual child. I have met the boy with straw-coloured hair, but I think you and I both know that is not the son you birthed. Where is he?" She looked at Merlin, her eyes white with fear. "I would suggest that if I ask your husband, Gawain, he might be just as confused. I take it he doesn't know that you swapped out the child. He's been raising a child he thought was being illegitimate, but it wasn't even illegitimate at all. I take it you've hidden the son." Igraine smiled at Merlin. "Have I?" she said. "Well, that makes you very clever, doesn't it?" "Tell me where he is," said Merlin. She laughed, and spat at him. "I'll tell you nothing, murderer." Merlin walked over and sat on the edge of Igraine's bed. "It would do better for me if you could tell me where your son is right now." "Better? How?" she said. "So you can take him and hand him over so he can go and be some high king and get embroiled in these stupid wars and politics? That's not how you live life." No, I won't tell you where he is. He's safe where he is, and there's no chance of him becoming a king or a knight or any such thing," she said. And she turned, and in one swift movement ran to the window of the keep and leapt from the walls to the rocks and the waves below. Merlin sighed and stood up and turned to face the men. "Uther will want to question Gawain," he said. "Open the gates, let him in, let it be done. Though I do not think Gawain will know anything." Uther Pendragon tortured Gawain for a long time until he died. And in that time, in amongst all the screams of desperation and pain, Gawain was not able to utter a single word about where the true son of Igraine was. He did not know. Igraine must have switched out her real son for a different one long, long ago, fearing that this day might one day come. She had hidden him far away from the politics of lords and knights and kings, somewhere where he would never be embroiled in these mad fits of bloodlust and rage. 1,000 years before, when the Roman Empire had invaded England, they had created one long stretch of wall along England's northern edge, dotted with border forts. It was at the other end of the country to the castle of Tintagel. And there, almost on the northeastern coast of England, there lay the city of Novum Castrum, a city that was built upon the wall itself so that the city could control trade in and out of Scotland. It was a huge city, a great city, famous for the quality of metal that it produced, for it took ore from the mines of Morpeth in Scotland and turned it into some of the strongest weaponry the world had ever seen. It was ruled by Sir Ector de Marie, cousin to Queen Igraine of Cornwall. And 12 years before, Igraine had come to Ector one night to hand him a small child wrapped in a bundle of rags. She'd entrusted this child to Ector, asked him to ask no questions about who the child was or where the child had come from, just that the child was important to her and no one else, and that she wanted her cousin to raise this child in his household, not as son, not as squire, not as knight. Raise him in the kitchen, she said, just give him an honest job and a happy job where he will know no strife. 12 years ago, Ector had agreed to do this and had taken the child on, and the wet nurses of the castle had raised him, and in time he had become a kitchen boy. Ector had asked his cousin what the name of the child was before she left. Igraine had smiled and told Ector that the child's name was Arthur. And then she was gone. And now, 12 years later, as Gawain died in agony at the hands of Uther Pendragon's torturers, and as the Low Kings of Scotland rubbed their hands to think just how Uther Pendragon would be divvying up his lands and wealth to pay his debts now that Tintagel was taken, not even caring that Uther had failed to find the son he was so desperately seeking. The boy named Arthur peeled potatoes in the castle's kitchen and dreamed about becoming a knight. Hello ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed tonight's tale. The best is yet to come though, so make sure that you've hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you could tell someone else about the show, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.